So our first presenter is Gabriel Schechter, who will be talking about his work with the great Sports Illustrated photographer Neil Leifer, whose books of collections of his photographs are for sale. And Gabriel has been working with Neil on the presentation of those books. He has some fascinating stories about that. So Gabriel, take it away.
Thank you, RJ. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. RJ, I hate to tell you this, but I don't think I can scroll. So you're going to have to do it, or I figure it out again.
I will have to do the scrolling. So, yes.
All right.
Sorry about that.
So we've got the cover shot of the book. This book was done in 2007. It came out. And I was working at the Hall of Fame and got a call from the folks at Taschen, a very high-end German publisher that does a lot of art, photograph, architecture, design books. And they had a few people in mind to write captions for the book and asked me to help them get a hold of those people, and none of them wanted to do it. And they said, can you suggest anybody? And I said, why don't you let me try it? And the result has been about a 15-year association with Neil Leifer. Unfortunately, the editor of the baseball book was a jerk who got fired before the end of the project. And he did not want me and Neil to have any contact. And he succeeded in that goal. But Neil and I met subsequently when we were working on his collection of football photos, and more recently his boxing photos, and I'll talk more about that in a while. So this shot is Don Drysdale coming off the mound after Game 3 of the 1963 World Series. He just beat the Yankees 1-0. And if you'll notice, they're on the infield. They have not crossed the foul line yet, which raises the question, how did Neil get this photo? Go down, yeah. Now, here's a photo, that's the inside cover of a book called Relentless, the story behind his photos. And there you see Neil. And you see that they've crossed the foul line now. So he was closer to the foul line when he took that photo. He's actually backing up here, but I want to point out that immediately to Neil's left is Leo DeRocher. And the fellow at the far left is Walter Alston. In other words, Neil Leifer was out there in front of Don Drysdale before Leo DeRocher was, which I think is a badge of honor. But here's the story. At Dodger Stadium, there's the photographer's well behind the plate where Mike Brito used to wield that radar gun. And Neil is a very friendly fellow, and he always is friendly to security guards who can do him favors. And he had buttered up the guy at the gate, and he said to him, if the last out of the game is a pop-up or a high fly where we know it's going to be the last out, can you open the gate up a little early? And it was a fly ball to right field, and the guy opened up the gate early. And when Neil got to the foul line, there was nobody in front of him except Drysdale, Roseboro, and Jim Gilliam on the left in the cover shot. Neil was 20 years old when this was taken. And one of the book where this photo appears is aptly titled Relentless, because Neil is absolutely relentless and determined and original and obsessed with getting the best photos. I think many of you probably are familiar with the photo we took of Alan Amici crossing the goal line in overtime in the so-called greatest game ever played in 1957. And Neil took that photo from the end zone. He had spent the season as a volunteer attending wheelchair patients from the VA hospital who were bussed into the Giants games and stationed in a corner of the end zone. And Neil brought coffee to the security guys. And so when the crucial overtime came around and all the drunk fans were carrying on, the security guys knew Neil was no problem. And there's a photo of him standing in the back of the end zone, taking that photo of Alan Amici. That was on his 16th birthday. His most famous photos, of course, are the Muhammad Ali photos, and actually Cassius Clay when he knocks Liston out and standing over him and brandishing his arm. That was taken when Neil was 21 years old, and he became friends with Ali and enjoyed a 50-year friendship, taken so many famous photos of Ali. So that's something to keep in mind about Neil. He started as a teenager. He got on the strength of the Amici photo, he got a job with Sports Illustrated when he got out of high school. Go down one, RJ. And they gave him these toys to play with. He's 21 here at Comiskey Park. And as you can see, this is a 4,000 millimeter lens, custom made for Life magazine. Life is on the front of it there. And imagine a kid getting to work with something like this when you're only 21 years old. And he's still going 6 years later. Last night he was at a big boxing match, and I'm itching to tell you about the boxing stuff, but this is baseball. Okay, so down one, the kind of shots he could get with a lens like that is this. This is Yogi Berra in the 1960 World Series. That's Smokey Burgess was the catcher. Looks like Moose Scarron on deck. Next. Here's another photo from the 1960 World Series, a different view. I guess all the weight is on his front foot because he really has followed through and is getting ready to run. Otherwise, it would seem like an awkward home run swing, wouldn't it? Next. Here's Sandy Koufax after game 4 and the Dodgers sweep. They only got 2 hits, but Sandy didn't need much help. All he allowed was a home run to Mickey Mantle, and there's a photo of Mantle rounding the bases in the book with Koufax staring at him in the background. Next. This is game 2 of the 1966 World Series. Jim Palmer pitching the first of those 3 straight shutouts. And this brings up one of my favorite trivia questions, and I offer it to you folks in the Mathewson-Plank chapter, because you've got a shot at it. And here's the question. 2 players have driven in more runs in a World Series than the other team scored in that World Series. And of course, you're looking at one of the World Series. And you should know what the other one is, but getting the players who drove in the runs is a little tougher. So work on that one. Maybe someone there knows it. I hope so. It usually stumps people. Okay, next. This is game 1 of the 67 series. Really a phenomenal photo. You can see the ball a little bit through the webbing. It really was a snow cone, and Curt Flood was the batter. Next. This is one of my favorite photos, and it also shows that the editor didn't really know what he was doing. After the first round, he actually cropped this photo so the Campaneris is at the top right corner, and Dick Green, the second baseman, is in the bottom left. He cut off the other three figures. But the whole point of this photo is that everybody is looking at first base. Why? Well, the Reds had the bases loaded and one out. And I think it was Tony Perez hit the ground ball. And the question is, are they going to get two, or will the run count? And there's Johnny Bench has crossed the plate. Third base, that's the pitcher. Campaneris, the shortstop. Even Dennis Menke, the Red who took out Dick Green on the pivot, he's already twisting his head around to see what happened at first base. And Perez was safe. The run counted. Next. This is a bigger photo. As you can see, I took photos from the book rather than doing it another way. And this photo actually goes quite a bit to the right along the grandstand. This was taken in 1965, and Neil wanted to photograph Maury Wills stealing and the tag. So he mounted this photo inside second base, but Willie Davis spoiled the fun. Davis tried to stretch a single into a double, was out and kicked the camera and broke it. So there was no chance for Wills. This is an ingenious shot, and it only in the last few years, a couple of times have I seen TV crews put a lens inside second base to get close-up views of tags. Neil did that 60 years ago. Next, here's another photo that you could not possibly get today. I think of it as the Close Encounters photo. This was taken of Shea Stadium in 1967, and you might know that Shea Stadium is only a half mile or a mile from LaGuardia Airport. And believe it or not, Neil Leifer got permission to occupy a helicopter on a runway at LaGuardia, and they were allowed to go up for 15 or 20 seconds at a time in between landings. I mean, think about that. He said they had to go up 4, 5, 6 times before he got the images he wanted. So picture that. Of course, it couldn't happen now, but it seems pretty bizarre even for then, doesn't it? All right. I want to talk about some of these great pictures. Neil worked for Sports Illustrated from 1959 to 1978. And then he moved over to Time magazine. And so the photos in this book mainly cover the 60s and 70s. This is Bob Gibson, Game 7 of the 67 World Series, one of his greatest efforts. I've been trying to think of somebody besides Max Scherzer who reminds me of that kind of sweeping motion that Gibson had, but no other pitcher really has. Jim Bunning did it to some extent, but this photo really captures that dynamic way Gibson had of putting his whole body into every pitch. Next, when I captioned this photo, I said the batter didn't have a ghost of a chance against Sandy Koufax. There's another photo coming up that's a better image of his delivery, but I do like this bearing down look that he has, and I wouldn't want to be the batter. Next, this is my favorite. this is pretty much the pose with the statue they've put up in San Francisco. About 15 years ago, word went around the Hall of Fame library where I worked that Juan Marichal was in the lobby. It was just during the winter. He had come to do some promotional thing, and he was alone in the lobby with two friends of his. And I went over and introduced myself and said, I just want to tell you what an absolute joy it was to watch you pitch. And what followed was a wonderful 10-minute conversation with him. And I later talked with him on the phone for quite a while. And it was a joy. I made that statement to one other major leaguer, Luis Tiant. They really were something to watch, and this is a great photo of it. Speaking of great motions, next up is Sandy Koufax pitching to Willie Mays, and if you can zoom in somehow, I mean, if you ever see this photo, this is thank you, nice work. This is the exact instant when the thumb has come off the ball, and all he has on the ball are the two fingers. And it's an amazing shot, isn't it? This was in the first inning of the game at Candlestick Park on August 22nd, 1965. Neil had been following the Giants for on and off that summer. They were making a good run at the Dodgers. And when Koufax and Juan Marichal started on the 22nd, Neil was there. Here's Koufax to Mays in the first inning. He flied out on the first inning. Next, you've seen this photo or something very much like it. And I've got three photos here for you that tell a lot of the story. Some of you may know it, that the day before, Don Drysdale had buzzed a few of the Giants, as was his habit. And the next day, Marichal came out in the top of the first and buzzed a couple of people. And retaliation would be the thing. But Sandy Koufax, who's over there on the left edge of this photo, Sandy Koufax did not like to throw at people. He possibly from his early Wilder days, he just did not like engaging in that the way that Drysdale did. So he did not throw at the Giants. So when Juan Marichal came to bat, eventually, John Roseboro, the catcher, took it upon himself to buzz Marichal. On the throw back to the pitcher, he grazed Marichal's ear, and Marichal turned around and conked him over the head with the bat. This photo, as you can tell, is taken after the first blow, and Marichal has raised the bat to hit him again. Over on the right side is Tito Fuentes. And of course, he never did strike the second blow. Next, RJ. In the aftermath of the fight, Willie Mays was the peacemaker. Willie himself escorted Roseboro back to the dugout and sat with him. You can see the kind of stricken look on Koufax's face at the far left. You can see he's really quite appalled by the whole thing. But Mays was forced in diffusing things from becoming worse. And Koufax was so upset that he walked two batters and then gave up a 3-run home run to Willie Mays. The the deciding blow in the game. Maybe I shouldn't say that was the deciding blow, the deciding home run. Next, and here's a photo that I didn't really think about much till I was putting this together. But here is Sandy Koufax, and you can tell that the batter has been brought back. Look at the expression on Koufax's face. It's, oh my God. Oh, I could have hit him. Watch out. I didn't mean that. That's the man who's whose specific nature almost causes catcher a fractured skull. This shot just says so much to me, especially in the context of the fight. This photo, by the way, was taken 2 years earlier. Okay, next. Two wonderful faces. This photo is circulated somewhat. This is Casey Stengel in 1962. Love it. Next is a wonderful portrait. There's some great Roberto Clemente photos in this book, and this is one of the 3 that I've put in this slideshow. There's so much character in that portrait. It's really beautiful. I've got a few shots of batting stances. First, Clemente. A fierce look. Next is Hank Aaron. I'm sorry, Sam Musial. One of the things that I had fun with writing captions was incorporating quotes. And I should mention that one reason the football book is much better than the baseball book was that for the football book, Taschen made a deal with Jim Murray's widow to piece together some of his football columns as an introduction. And I had carte blanche to use Jim Murray quotes in my captions, which was a beautiful thing. I was sort of like Neil with that 4,000 millimeter lens. But for this Musial photo, I found a perfect quote about his stance from Ted Lyons, a Hall of Fame pitcher. Sam Musial at the plate looked like a small boy peeking around the side of the building to see if the cops were coming. I just love that. And you can see it in this photo. All right, next up is Hank Aaron, Relaxation at the plate. I compare, Willie Mays and Hank Aaron is the eternal comparison. And someone who grew up watching them both, I felt that the difference between them, that Willie Mays had this barely contained energy, this exuberance that was just looking for a reason to burst forth. And Aaron gave the impression of tremendous energy and strength contained and controlled by the moment that he went to the plate. He used to amble up to the plate and take a fair amount of time fitting that helmet over his cap. Not many players wore that the double cap that way, but he would take his time and then get dirt on his hands and gathering all that strength and energy and focus, and that's reflected in this photo beautifully. Next up is Mickey Mantle. There's a great photo in the book also of his swing left-handed. This is in Game 4 of the 1962 World Series, and it captures that raw power, I think, mainly in seeing how low that right knee dips. That his leverage came mainly from his legs, I think. It's just a beautiful shot. All right, next, RJ, I'm going to talk about fights. Maybe this, yeah, and this was May 20th, 1976, Yankee Stadium, sixth inning. The Yankees were up 1-0. And what we have here in the book, this is a double fold out. There are 8 full page photos of this kind of notorious fight. And if you fold them all out, it's like 5 or 6 feet long. It's really an extraordinary sequence that Neil got here. Terry Cooney is the ump. 2 outs, Lou Piniella trying to score from second on a single. And here comes a collision with Carlton Fisk next. Here is the start of the collision. Next, here's here they are rolling in the dirt. And I forget who the Yankee is there that's watching. It's like these 2 guys are going nuts. And it actually took a moment for the brawl to start because everybody was kind of transfixed by what was going on with Piniella and Fisk. And that's a great image there. Both of them upside down. Next. Billy, standing guard. He eventually came to regret that. I believe that's Yastrzemski kind of getting in there as the wrestling match continues. Next. Now, the bottom parts of the next couple of photos are where it gets interesting because guys start falling and getting trampled. You can see, like, I think 3 bodies on the ground here. There's Dwight Evans leaning in. Yaz on the right. Fisk is standing up. I don't know what happened, how he got loose from the fray, but there he is. Next. I like this. Rick Burleson, sideways. That's Bill Lee. I don't know if Bill Lee is throwing him onto the pile or trying to get him off the pile, but you can see it's gone a little haywire again. Yep. As I noted in the caption, you know it's a brutal fight when Thurman Munson is the peacemaker. He actually was not involved in the fight, and here is pulling Piniella away. And I think there's one more, right? Yeah. This is Billy. Greg Nettles body slammed him, he told me. And while he was down, Nettles punched him in the jaw. So Lee was pretty badly injured and missed a couple of months, I think. Go to the next one. Yeah, let's talk about boxing. Neil is most famous for his boxing photos. And we did the football book in 2008, and the boxing one was going to be the next one. And a decade went by, during which Taschen published 2 big boxing books. They redid their Muhammad Ali Greatest of All Time book, and they did another whole book on the George Foreman fight in Zaire. So they didn't get around to this one until 2018, and we got about 2/3 of the way through it, and it got put on hold. First, they didn't like the order of the arrangement and decided to redo the layout. And second, there were so many great fights still happening. As you can see from this title page, this book contains 60 years of Neil Leifer's photos. It starts with Inga Maria Hansen and Floyd Patterson at Yankee Stadium in 1959. Again, Neil was 16 years old, taking his first boxing photos, and the book ends with the second Tyson Fury Deontay Wilder fight. He figures when they come out with the trade edition in a year or two, they'll have 4 or 5 fresh fights to include that aren't in this book. Anyway, so it sat on the sidelines for 2 years, and then an amazing thing happened. Out of the blue, they sent me the entire new layout, over 400 pages with the photos, and all of this arrived the same day that the pandemic struck in 2020 and everything shut down. It was right in the middle of March. And Neil lives in Manhattan, and he's just a gadabout. But he was stranded. He was secluded in his apartment, and we had all these photos to play with. And from that day, for the next 6 months, Neil and I talked for an hour a day on the phone. The first 2-3 months were devoted to the book. We went over every inch of every photo, every word of every caption. He would tell me a 10-minute story that I'd have to distill into a 40-word caption. It was an unbelievable experience. And of course, when we were done with the book, we had become friends, and we just told stories for an hour a day. Once he started getting around, things tapered off, of course, and now we talk once or twice a month. We talked the other day, and he sends his regards, and he was happy to see that I chose the Drysdale cover shot, because when he does presentations on luxury cruises, and he said those are the two photos he starts with. So I did want to share. I've got this boxing book is the most extraordinary that I've been a part of. You can see this is my favorite page because it has my name on it, captions. This is, you'll notice I got through the whole baseball section without throwing any statistics at you, except maybe that trivia question. But I can't help throwing out a few stats about this book. The pages are 13 by 14 inches, and the book is 440 pages. It weighs 25 pounds. The book weighs 25 pounds. In a moment, you'll see part of the reason why. And it sells for $1,000, which is a pretty scary thought. It came out in December of 2020. They printed 1,000 copies for sale, and they've sold all but 50 or 60 of them. Yeah, next shot, RJ. See what we've got. That's my cat Zane checking out. He's sitting in one of the several boxes that the book came in, and the thing on the right with the photo looking down at the ring, that's the slip cover. That's the second Liston fight up in Maine. On the left, you can see part of the cover of the book itself. Maybe the next shot has that. Yeah, this is the actual cover, and you can't tell from this image, but it is solid aluminum. Extremely glossy, heavy, literally heavy cover. It's an extraordinary book. If you have any interest in boxing, it's really a must. His photos are wonderful, and an amazing book. I got one more image of it. There's Zane again, getting a better look at the cover. I've got a few more minutes, and I want to talk about some of Neil's non-sports photos. Yeah, just leave that one there. He worked for Time for about 15 years, and since then he's freelanced, and he's been a filmmaker. He's directed a lot of short films, and some of them are wonderful too. Here's a photo that he waited his whole life to take. He grew up on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, but as a kid, he was fascinated by boats and airplanes. He lived near the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and he used to go out as a kid and photograph the boats coming in. This photo was taken over Kuwait in 1991, and he had always wanted to shoot a formation of fighter jets. These are F-1 jets. This photo was taken the day after the war ended, and so they had some discretion to send up some planes to fly. And this sort of boggles my mind. They put Neil and his assistant in a larger plane that was used for refueling, and they harnessed them severely, opened the cargo bay door, and hung them out the bottom of the plane so Neil could get this shot. Neil was in direct communication with the I think lieutenant who was flying the lead plane in the center, and you can sort of if you read a little bit, you can see the colonel, excuse me, let me worry about the planes, you worry about the picture. So Neil is actually on the phone to him. Can you get the second one from the left? You can get him in a little bit. And so that's what he did to get this photo. It's extraordinary. Let's leave it here for a moment. The most amazing thing Neil did, I think, was in 1982 when he undertook a secret cover story for Time on prisoners, specifically sort of high-file prison inmates and what their lives were like inside prison. He wrote to 7 of the most notorious inmates in America. He wrote to Charles Manson, James Earl Ray, Sir Hans Sirhan, Richard Speck. I can't remember the others. And the only one who wrote back was Manson. And over the course of the year, Neil visited 7 of the toughest prisons. He went to Attica, Leavenworth, Joliet, San Quentin, down in Texas, I can't think of the name of. Anyway, he went to all of them, and he told me all about this, some extraordinary things. In order to photograph anybody, he had to get their signed release. As he notes, prisoners are extremely litigious because they have nothing else to do with their time. So he had to get them to sign a release, and he was given free reign to go walk around the prison anywhere he wanted. He went without a guard, just as assistant, and he told me that he was never physically threatened because everybody knew that if they did anything to an important visitor, they'd be in huge trouble. And if they were going to get in huge trouble for violence, they were going to attack somebody they didn't like. And Neil was affable, and he'd go around and they'd curse him out and tell him to go away and stuff. But he managed to get these photos. And here I think is the ballsiest story I know about Neil. He was in Joliet, and he said most of the prisoners there and were Black Muslims, and they were extremely hostile to him. But he's wandering around the halls, and they're in their cells or out of their cells. And one thing he told me was that the walls of these cells were decorated by the most lascivious, lewd, obscene photos the prisoners could get, and that was one of his obstacles to getting photographs. Usually, he mounted his camera in the ceiling of the cell and shot straight down. So he's in Joliet, and nobody wants to talk to him, and he sees these two guys standing in front of their cell, and he gets up to them and he looks in their cell, and he notices all their walls are covered with boxing photos, and most of them are his. So he starts talking to the guys, and after a few minutes, one of them says, "Well, what kind of pictures do you take anyhow?" And he says, "Well," he points in the cell and he says, "Well, for starters, most of those." And they call BS on him and start giving him a hard time. And picture this. Neil says to them, "Well, come here." And Neil walks into their cell. And these two murderers meekly follow him into the cell, and Neil had his name tag. And he knew that the SI cover photos always had the photo credit on them. And he starts pointing, "Well, there's one, and there's another one." And one of the guys was a huge Muhammad Ali fan and had 6 or 8 of his Ali photos up on the walls. And he sat there in the cell with them for an hour, talking, taking photos. And when he went to leave the cell, the other prisoners were lined up all down the hallway for their turn. Extraordinary man. Extraordinary. Let's go down one. So the only person who responded was Manson, who was housed in Vacaville, California, in a criminally insane facility. So he arranged to go out there. He and his assistant, they went out there. Manson had a job cleaning up the prison chapel, and that's where they met. Just Manson, Neil and his assistant, and the priest. He told me that of all the prisoners he met, Manson was the absolute least threatening. For one thing, the guy's tiny. He was tiny. And as Neil points out, he himself was not violent. He had a long rap sheet, but it was all for theft and non-violent stuff. Anyway, so Neil told me, "I had a feeling that if it came down to it, I could take him." So there was Manson. But Manson wanted to get paid. Some Japanese film crew had visited, and they paid him to take his image. And Sports Illustrated didn't pay any of their subjects. And Neil said, I'm sorry, man, you can't pay you." And Manson said, "Sorry," and walked away. And that was that. And for the first time in his life, Neil had to fly back to New York with his assistant first class and tell his editor, "No dice." About 6 weeks later, he got a phone call from a fellow in Texas who said he was a former fellow prisoner of Manson's, and they had stayed in touch. And Neil told me if he ever writes a book about this, the title will be what the guy said to him next, which was, "Charlie likes you." I don't know if that's the good news or the bad news, but Charlie liked Neil. and invited him back to Vacaville to take photos. And this is the portrait that resulted. Neil told me he was pretty sure that Manson took a pencil or pen or whatever he could find and to highlight the swastika tattooed into his forehead to make sure that was visible. Next is Manson in his cell. Pretty plain, as you can see. Just a few photos. And I have one more photo for you. It's the last photo in the baseball book, and I think of it as Goodbye, Roberto, taken in 1968. And Taschen used this just at the very end, actually, in all the end matter. And so I use it as the end of this talk. I think those are all my stories. Any questions? Not all at once.
Right. Hey, Steve Johnson here. Hey, what's next for you now?
Well, I'm writing a baseball book that means a lot to me. It's about the dozens of ways I experienced baseball in my childhood, how they charted the course of my life, and how most of them came around full circle when I was working at the Hall of Fame. So I'm going back to the late 50s when I was a kid, and you know, going forward about 50 years. One good example. You know, I was 15 when The Glory of Their Times came out. My father bought it for me, and we devoured it because those were the players he had grown up watching. And a decade later, I reread the book, and by that time I was in my 20s and a aspiring novelist. And I read the Victory Faust story that Fred Snodgrass told. And my God, what a great novel! And I wrote a novel updating it. I gave them to the Cubs in the late 70s, and I tried to write the novel in 2 or 3 versions. That led me to Cooperstown, and that led to my getting the job there and writing my first book, which was the nonfiction story of Victory Faust. The novel I had tried to invent was nowhere near as poignant or funny as the actual story. And then it came full circle. From 2008 to 14, I think it was, I was the chairman of the committee that gave out the Larry Ritter Award. And I had met Ritter in the late 90s. He wrote the foreword to my Faust book. So there was a 40-year span that had a lot to do with winding up where I was. So that's what I'm writing about, Steve.
I have a question. What's your favorite picture that you've taken? Since I'm from Pittsburgh,
Yeah.
your Roberto Clemente pictures are great.
Yeah, I wish I had taken them. Yeah, Neil, I of the ones Neil took that I showed you, I think that portrait really is beautiful to me. There's a serenity and dignity and strength in that face that you know, I think encapsulates the way we feel now about Clemente.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions for Gabriel? right, well, thank you. And Gabriel, I appreciate you, your patience, especially today as we tried to deal with our
Thank you all
technical
very much. It was a
difficulties.
happy ending, I think.
All right. Our next speaker today is Stu Thornley. You all know Stu as a longtime SABR member, Bob Davids Award recipient for lifetime service to SABR. And so, Stu, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Okay, thanks. Hi, folks. I'm going to start off with a quote from Jimmy Breslin that was in the book, Can't Anybody Here Play This Game, about the 1962 Mets. And he wrote, if anyone is to have any fun out of life, one should proceed with the understanding that reminiscences are to be enjoyed, not authenticated. So I guess you could say that I don't have any fun out of life because I like to authenticate things. And this is a story of a tale that's been around for more than 100 years, and more than half of that time, it's been my futile attempts to document it. And you can see the screen there, that's a newspaper story from 1966 that had a big influence on my life. My folks showed this to me about Nicollet Park, which had been gone about 11 years. Last game was played there 2 months after I was born. And I liked old ballparks, which many of us do. I still do. And I'd heard things about Nicollet Park from Halsey Hall, the broadcaster on the Twins games, talking about games there, and from my dad, who was an usher out there. And Dave Mona, who I've gotten to know, has had a lot of stories of the quirkiness of that ballpark. And one of them involved Andy Oyler, a Miller shortstop in the early part of the 20th century. And the story of him hitting a ball into the mud in front of home plate and making a circuit of the bases while the other team searched futilely for the ball. They couldn't find it, and he had a 2-foot home run. So this interest in Nicollet Park led me to an interest in the Minneapolis Millers, ended up being my first book on to Nicollet. That's had a big influence on my life. So I'm very grateful for this article in the first place. And in the 80s, I was researching the Minneapolis Millers game by game, going through every box score, every game story. So I paid particular attention to the period from 1903 to 1910 when Oyler played for the team. I was always on the lookout for this 2-foot home run and getting the date that it happened. And there was a story of it being a rainy day at Nicollet Park. I was looking even closer. Well, what I ended up finding was nothing. Nothing like this happened. Oyler hit 1 home run in his time with the Millers. It was not at Nicollet Park. It was on the road. There was nothing special about the home run. Nothing to back the story up, at least when he was with the Millers, nothing emerged. But that didn't keep the story from being told and retold. And I'm seeing how I can move to the next one. Is this, I'm going to share a screen again. Okay, this might not be as simple as I thought. I want to show, oh, I think I know a better way to do it. Sorry, we'll get it going here. I'm going to stop sharing the screen for just a second while I go back to finding that row of slides. I guess I could have just done this in a PowerPoint. Okay, I'm going to share a screen again. If it doesn't go any smoother than this, we'll just we just won't go into sharing. Anyway, that's a book that came out in about 1990 by Michael Bryson, part of the Bryson sports writing family in Iowa. His dad, Bill Bryson, was a sports writer for Associated Press, collected quirky stories, and his son eventually put them into a book that was the Oyler home run was the title story in the book, and it was not only called the 24-inch home run, but other outlandish, incredible, but true events in baseball history. Okay, you want to bet? Bill Bryson had already written about this in Baseball Digest and Catholic Digest. This thing had turned up before, and share again. But I really didn't know where the story came from or how long it had been around until Kerry Smith of SABR helped me to find that in 1911, this story started appearing around the country. This was in a small town newspaper, and this same story of Andy Oyler and this 2-foot home run was making the rounds in all sorts of small town newspapers around the country. So from 1911, at least we can trace the story back as far as that. It always said it was against the rival St. Paul Saints. It said it was last of the ninth. Obviously, we've got to make it more dramatic, winning it. It had colorful descriptions that Oyler rounded third, like Casey Jones and his 6-wheeler, making connections with the Santa Fe and pulled up at home plate, scoring the winning run. So that's when the story got going. And it never happened with the Millers. We know that, but obviously good researchers also know that things, the essence of a story might still be there, might still be true with even if some of the details don't check out. So that's what I've still spent my time trying to find out. Did he do it when he was in college at Washington and Lee, or Washington and Jefferson in Pennsylvania? Did he do it in some of the amateur teams he played on? I'm still looking, haven't found it. It did turn up in a baseball card in 1955. And in the early 2000s, when I was writing a book on the general history of baseball in Minnesota, I heard from a boyhood friend of Andy Oyler's grandson. And this friend has said that he had this baseball card that had on the back who hit the shortest home run in baseball, and the answer, Andy Oyler. So he went to John Oyler, Andy's grandson, and said, "Is this part of your family?" And John said, "Yes, it is. That's my grandpa." And when Andy came to visit the family, he met with the boys, told them the story of this home run, and they got the firsthand account of this home run. This was from Lou Ortiz baseball card in 1955. So I wrote some things about it that I'd never found it. It didn't happen with the Millers. And are these pictures coming through okay? I'm doing it in a really clumsy manner, I know, but
We're seeing him, yes.
okay. And you're not now, is that right? Because I stopped screen sharing.
And we're not now, yes.
Okay, well then it's kind of working, and sorry how clunky this is, but we'll get it. I had pretty much forgotten about all this until somebody contacted me in early 2020, and they said, "Hey, did you see Antiques Roadshow?" There was the mud ball, the Andy Oyler home run ball on it. So I found it online, and here it is. It was done in Delaware, and this turns out to be Ted Oyler, Andy's grandson, who lived in Philadelphia, and brought the photo and a cap, and you can see there the ball in the left-hand corner. And he had the story of how his grandpa, after hitting this home run, plucked the ball out of the mud and then wrote the address of his family on it and put a stamp on it. You know, like, wow, that's something, you know, it's at least something exists to represent that ball now. And he, go back to the screen share here. They pointed out on there the smudge where the stamp was on the ball. And I guess it was the way the Postal Service worked back then. Something like that was possible. You could actually stick the ball in the mail with a hand scrawled address on it and stick a stamp on it. They'd get it there. So I guess that part of it is plausible. One thing that the grandson said is that he let's come back here. That it was accompanied a few days later by a letter that Andy had sent explaining the significance of this ball. And I thought, wow, you know, a letter that would, if there's a date on it, would help to narrow down when this happened, all of that. Well, as it turns out, there is no letter. A different relative confirmed that and said he chalked it up to what he calls ancestral elaboration. You know, I guess if we can have terms such as alternative facts these days, why not ancestral elaboration? But this did get me going again. I never did talk to the person who was on Antiques Roadshow, but I ended up even better talking to this person's dad, Fred Oyler, who lives in Carlisle. Fred is Andy's son. And he's in his 90s. I think he was born in 1927. We had a couple of good conversations right before the pandemic hit. Fred owns the ball. He lent it to his son for the Antiques Roadshow. He confirmed that there's no letter that followed the ball. And he freely stated at that point that this story could be a folklore or fact. Well, after this, I got going on the whole story again, and I went back into the archives of SABR. That's terrific resource. I know many of you are on SABR, and I found this gem of a response that was on there because I was asking about Andy Oyler's 2-foot home run. And you can read that there. Sabermetric research has gone too far. You know, somebody stop him before he kills again. I got a kick out of that, and I interpreted it as kind of a tongue-in-cheek comment. I thought it's coming from a SABR member. I certainly hope that it's somebody who does want to know the real story, and but is making this in a tongue-in-cheek manner. But you know, I have encountered serious opinions from people who just don't want their legends destroyed. They claim people like me have a fetish for accuracy. Anyone familiar with the movie The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, you know the sentiment that when the legend becomes fact, print the legend. So that's you know, that is what you run into a lot, you know, and that's okay. It's before SABR was started, long before SABR was started, there was a book by Alfred H. Spink in 1911 that includes all sorts of wild tales. One of a St. Paul pitcher losing a game to Minneapolis when a batted ball got stuck on a nail high up on the outfield fence and allowed all these runs to score before his teammates could get a ladder. More recently than that, a 1958 book that I ended up getting as a kid, I still have, by Mac Davis, called Sports Shorts. Has equally implausible stories. There's one of a dead man winning a game for a Benson, Minnesota team around the turn of the century. You get around the turn of the century without a definite date, that's always a red flag on how much there is to the story. Well, this never happened. And by going to the County Historical Society, I at least found sort of the derivation of that myth that was concocted by a railroad man who got together with an umpire, and they sent it out in the telegraph wire. You know, most stories emanating from thin air can't be traced back to a source. And that Sandy Oyler story is tracing back the source. Well, I just probably never will. And Bill Stern, there's a guy kind of goes back before our time, renowned for hyperbola and outright fabrications. And he would bristle at criticism of his myth making. And in his autobiography, wrote that his sports program was strictly entertainment, and being such was one for which he was entitled unlimited dramatic license. Love these terms, unlimited dramatic license. Well, how about entertainment allowing for dramatic license even when the stories are presented as fact? And that question became central to a really captivating thread on SABR in the mid-90s about Ken Burns' baseball. And there was an innocuous inquiry on the listserv, and that eventually led to questions of whether Burns had intentionally misrepresented information for the sake of the story. Now, I'm not saying he did or didn't. The interesting debate came down to a more primary question. If he did intentionally misrepresent facts for the sake of the story, was it proper? And there was a consultant on the Burns project, former Hall of Fame librarian Tom Heitz, who responded in defense of Ken Burns. And he wrote, "The art of myth making in baseball journalism has been unfortunately largely lost by the current generation of broadcasters and scribes who have been subjected to training in journalistic accuracy." So that was one view, the art of myth making. I was happy that there were very few people who agreed with this, and there was a lot of spirited debate until Nancy Jo Leachman got to the core of the question by asking why is this a debate between choosing between historical accuracy and folkloric awe and wonder? Over time though, I don't know if I've softened, but I've at least learned the value of colorful tales, even dubious ones, and that they can be told with sort of a buyer beware disclaimer. That article from 1966 from Dave Mona that I showed at the beginning, well, that was fueled by stories that may or may not be true, but he produced the folkloric awe and under that Nancy Jo Leachman wrote of, while noting that Dave Mona wrote part of Nicolet's lore exists in the realm of hard to believe and verify anecdotes. That's kind of a nice buyers beware sort of thing. Here are the stories, enjoy them, but just understand, don't take them as totally true. I heard from a guy named Matt Tavares, and Matt wrote a book around the time I was working on this general history of baseball in Minnesota. And there it is. Is that coming up here? The Mudball book by Matt Tavares. He wrote a nice picture book out of it, but he did know that the story was suspect, and he acknowledged it in the books afterward that many historians believe Oyler's muddy home run never happened. But even though these stories might not be true, they endure because they give us heroes we can emulate and every man with whom we can identify. I thought, you can still.
That particular cover is not visible. We're still looking at the Stop Stu Before He Kills Again.
Oh, okay. Well, nobody did that either. Thank you. You still have a chance.
There we are.
Yeah, there you go. So that shows Nicollet Park and Andy Oyler in the mud. And he made a nice book out of it, but still acknowledged it. And I'm fine with that. I guess I was more bothered by Michael G. Bryson, who used true in the title of his book and even referred to professional baseball's shortest bona fide homer. I don't know, he's got a different definition of bona fide than I do. I did write to him to ask, and not really to challenge him, is just to ask, hey, do you have any more information on this? Just things like that, and I never did hear back. But this gets into something I've preached about a lot, skepticism. It's an essential quality in a researcher. I say question everything, but I also learned that sensitivity is somewhat important too. I got to know Joe Hauser in the early 1980s, and I was corresponding with him. I put together a list of the 69 home runs he hit for the Millers in 1933, and I broke it down and even put all the different ballparks that these home runs were hit in. And 50 of them were hit at Nicollet Park in Minneapolis, 50 at home. And, it kind of stood to reason it was an easy home run park for a left-handed hitter. And I sent it to him, and I got a letter back, Halsey Hall told me I hit half of them on the road, but, it doesn't matter. But I even got the sense there that maybe this had bothered him. And I called him for the first time a little later. And when I told him who I was, he said, are you the guy who says I only hit 19 home runs on the road? You got that wrong by more than half. And it did bother him. And, we can present our information in an accurate way. We can also not be as clumsy as I was, because I felt kind of bad that I in some way diminished this achievement in his mind, and that maybe there was a better way to have handled it. Of course, when I wrote about it in any publications, I stuck to the facts and all that, but I still learned some lessons. On the local sports scene, I've got to know 3 people. I'd probably call them insecure. People have just made up stuff out of thin air. One who claimed that he played a season of minor league baseball. He didn't. I'll call him Crash Davis. Another claimed that he was a prisoner of war in Vietnam for 7.5 years. He wasn't. I'll call him Robinson Risner, who was a POW for nearly 8 years. And that's not any disrespect intended to Robinson Risner, only to the person who made up the story, a person who wasn't a POW, just a POS. And somebody else told the story that he was a gunner on a B-17 during World War II. I'll call him Tail Gunner Joe. And with the My dad was a gunner in a B-17, so I don't like other people making that crap up. My dad was a POW in Germany, so I really don't like making people making that crap up. So you can imagine my feelings. But I know the kids of a couple of these people, and I'm guessing that they've probably heard these stories from their dad, that they played minor league baseball, that he was a tail gunner. And I've never even called out the people with this BS. I just let it go. It irritates me. But certainly with the kids, I'd never go to them and say, "Oh, your dad was not a tail gunner. He never was a flyer. Your dad didn't play minor league baseball." You know, there's a little sensitivity but I still want to pursue what really is. I'm glad I never had to write about any of these people, because it's kind of a big elephant in the room to avoid if somebody claiming this or that. And I don't know if I would have had to. One of them joined our SABR chapter, two of them did. And we invite them to give a profile about themselves in our newsletters. And I thought, oh, geez, you know, of course somebody, if he's claiming that he played minor league baseball, is going to put this in his profile. And what am I going to do with it? Am I going to call him out on it? Am I just going to ignore it? Fortunately, I managed to avoid that. But I was a little sensitive in getting in touch with the members of the Oyler family, because I could be this bad guy who's out there trying to destroy this story and show that it never happened. And I always approached it more, and I'm just trying to find out more information, trying to find the date that this happened, trying to document it. But things went well with Fred Oyler, whom I've talked to a few times. And as I mentioned, he indicated his own skepticism in the story. And it was a few months after I first talked to him that he called me, and he had discovered in his dad's trunk that there was an article by me that some family member must have put in. And it was with the news that the only home run that Oyler ever hit with the Millers was definitely not a mud ball home run. And Fred said, "You answered the question. It is definitely just a legend." But you know, true or not, well, that legend was one of the stories that got me going on Nicollet Park, the Minneapolis Millers, and it's had some real implications in my life. It did in Fred's life. He worked in Japan for 5.5 years, and he was told his dad's story to a coworker who was a baseball fan. And thanks to this coworker's connections, Fred ended up in a Japanese version of the television show, I've Got a Secret. You know, that is real. And far from being upset about any of this, Fred's very much at peace at it. He told me at the time, and he since has done this, that he was going to donate the ball to the Cumberland County Historical Society. And he has. RJ's gotten some pictures of it, and I think you folks are probably from different places, but if you are around Carlisle, get over there. There's, in fact, RJ sent me a lot of the pictures, a very nice display about Andy Oyler, and it's got that mud ball home run and different things. And it hasn't happened. Maybe it still will. That RJ said he was going to try to have an in-person SABR meeting and invite Fred. And I told Fred that I would like to come out there for such a meeting. And he told me he'd pay for my plane ticket. And I declined it, but I thought it was very nice. And I'm glad that we've kind of hit it off, and that this story has sort of brought us together too. You know, with the pursuit of facts doesn't mean the end of a legend. It might enhance it. And what greater baseball legend do we have? What more memorable myth than Abner Doubleday as the game's creator? And I've always found the story behind that to be even better than the story itself, that there was a committee committed or created to not to really learn the true origins of the game, but only to determine an answer it already wanted, and its reliance on a 1905 letter written by Abner Graves, who's quite a story in itself. So I think Andy Oyler's alleged mudball has taken on a life of its own, one more interesting than the original tale. And Fred Oyler said, "I think we'll put the story to bed finally. It will be in the Historical Society for people to enjoy that way." And it is. So I like how it came out. I'd still love if I can ever find just what the seed of that story was, but I'm hoping that I will get out there sometime. I don't know if it will be in time to meet Fred while he's still alive, but at least to see the display in the Historical Society. So with that, I can take any questions people might have. Yeah, Frank says, watched it with a jaundiced eye, with uh, the person, I did too. Frank, I had the same thing too. In fact, I have a friend who was on Antique Roadshow with Willie Mays's jersey, which he did authenticate when Mays was with the Millers in 1951. I wrote about that in the 2000 or in the 2012 SABR convention publication. Bob Evans with the Mays jersey, and he was on it. But yeah, it seems like nobody there really questions. It's an entertainment show. She just sort of fawned about it and gave it a value, but I had the same reaction.
So I noticed when you showed the picture of the ball that it looks like it had two colors of threads.
Yeah, and
I wondered if there was any way to verify if the league, was actually using a two-colored thread ball at that period. I mean,
I've got it in my notes, and I think they were, because that was one of the same thoughts I had, Bob. Like, is this ball authentic? There was another. I've learned I'm not an expert on the balls. There was another when I'm working on a memorabilia book, and when Babe Ruth came to Sleepy Eye, Minnesota, and hit a long home run, and kid got it. He's 10 years old at the time. The guy lived to 105, died just a few years ago. And some of the people took a picture of that ball, and that's where I started asking about that. But I did check into it, probably on SABR, such a great resource. You're on there too. And at least that part of it fit, that they were using the balls with the different colors of stitches. Bob, you're in Pennsylvania, aren't you? Are you in that area? No?
who?
You? Are you
Oh
in
yeah.
Pennsylvania?
I'm in near State College. I work at Penn State,
Okay.
at least
Well,
for another
that's
5 months.
good. There's the ball again that you can see. It's got the
Yeah.
stitches, and good picture that RJ got. RJ
Yeah.
is trying to see if they'll take the ball out and you can get a picture of it out of its casing there. And while the grandson was pointing to the smudge, it was supposed to be the stamp. At some point I asked Fred Fred doesn't, I think Fred is legally blind now, but he would have certainly been able to see the ball better earlier. If there was any indication of writing on the ball, such as an address, and Fred had said yes. And so RJ's our guy on the scene, and he's there in Carlisle, and he might be able to do that at some point.
Yeah, I took this picture when they opened the exhibit April. Well, they opened it April 1st. I went the next day, and it's just 4 blocks from my house here in Carlisle. And it's a great exhibit. It's sports in Cumberland County in general, but there's a particular, let me see if I can show that particular picture, but there's here, let me see if I can share this. But the curator, I guess not, the curator of the exhibit she'll be back in her office on Monday, and is going to try to get a picture of the ball outside of the case. But she did say that they got it from Fred in the case already, so she hasn't seen it, but she did feel that there is what does appear to be writing on the ball, but that the ink has faded over time. So, but she did agree that to try to get a picture of it outside of the case and see what we could see from that. So
Okay,
hopefully,
good. Yeah, I appreciate all that you've done with us, and it's intriguing if there's writing on it, or especially if it is enough to show if it would look like an address. I think the grandson had said he sent it to his wife, and Oyler wasn't married at the time, but he might have sent it to his parents in Carlisle. I ended up, because of this too, writing Andy Oyler's bio for the SABR Bio project, and newspapers.com is great where you can, first of all, just search for things as baseball career and amateur ball around that area, and just finding all the family history and things like that. But still hoping I could maybe find a game that he was playing for one of the town teams and some documentation that way. Yeah, that's what does strenuous mean? I looked up that.
Yeah, I wondered if they have corrected that since
Okay. Was it a
yeah.
strenuous life?
I think they meant strenuous, yes. But this
Okay.
is the Oyler exhibit of the overall sports in Cumberland County exhibit, and this exhibit will be there for quite a while. I think into the fall. So if anybody's in Carlisle, definitely check it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh, yeah, ultraviolet light may reveal ink. Yeah, I don't know if there's any, if they'd be up for it, the family, or I guess they'll be returning the ball to the family. And, I mean, if this, like they always say, if this were the FBI needed to do something, they could probably figure it out, but I don't expect that level.
All right. Any other questions for Stu? All right. I'm going to stop the recording so that if anybody does have any questions that they were too shy to share on the record, they can do that. So. Figure out how to do that.